Welcome back to the Gridiron Expert. Clear your plans on Sunday, guys, because that's the last bit of college football you're going to get to watch for a little over 3 months. The FCS spring season is coming to a close this Sunday down in Frisco, Texas, as Sam Houston State takes on South Dakota State for the FCS National Championship, the winner claiming their first national title in program history. This is a monumental occasion for so many different reasons, and this is going to be an absolute dogfight down in Frisco on Sunday. All the more reason, again, why you do not need to miss this game. You cannot miss it on Sunday afternoon. So, of course, guys, like we've done all season long, like we do all fall during the FBS season, just like we've done all spring in the FCS season, we are here for one final time to break down everything you need to know about this national championship game. Everything you need to know to get ready for the showdown between the Bearkats and the Jackrabbits. And let's go ahead and start with a little bit of background real quick. Why are both of these teams here? How did they get here? And we'll start with Sam Houston State. They're the designated road team, even though they're playing in their home state. And you look at the Bearkats, they're 9-0, guys. They are undefeated, have not lost this season. And they had an unbelievable comeback last week against James Madison in that semifinal matchup. They trailed 24-3 at halftime. Trailed by 21 points at halftime, but outscored the Dukes 35-11 in the second half, including 28 points in the third quarter to win 38-35. Unbelievable comeback by the Bearkats. And an unbelievable game, period. One of the best games I think we've seen all year long. So they are 9-0. They are in the national championship, rightfully so. Same can be said for South Dakota State, who you could arguably say has been the best team, complete team, all year long. They are the number one team going into the playoffs for a reason. And we saw that again in their semifinal matchup, dominating Delaware 33-3. Holding the Fightin' Blue Hens to just 216 total yards. And we saw the Jackrabbits' balanced attack in force yet again, like we've seen all year. 186 passing yards, 168 rushing yards, 0 penalties for the Jackrabbits in that game against Delaware. So both teams, rightfully so, deserve to be in this national championship game. Each have had a very difficult and different path to this national championship game. But again, history will be made one way or another. Again, neither team has ever won a national title, despite having a rich history of success, really, I'd say, over the past decade or so. So let's go ahead and take a look at these two teams, and we're going to take a look at the offense first. We'll start with the Bearkats. If you've been following our analysis, especially through the FCS playoffs, you've heard us talk so highly about Sam Houston State and their passing attack, because that's what their strength is offensively. Their strength is the passing game, led by one of the best quarterbacks in the country in Eric Schmid. And you look at what he did last week against James Madison. He didn't have the sexiest stat line. He didn't have the best stat line out there. Had 2 interceptions in the first half. They were trailing by 21, but they lit it up in that second half. Schmid had 3 total touchdowns on the day, 1 passing, 2 rushing, 218 passing yards. He really found his groove in that second half. And so again, Sam Houston State's one of those teams, because of how explosive they are, because of how fast and electric they are, and how fast they move the ball, they're never out. Even when they find themselves down, they are never out. And we can give all the credit in the world to Eric Schmid because he deserves it. He is one of the best quarterbacks in the country. One of the best when it comes to running this offense. But the X factor for the Bearkats, the X factor for Sam Houston State, is their top wide receiver in Jaquez Ezzard. He single-handedly changed the game for Sam Houston State last week against James Madison. First off, his yearly stats, 753 yards, 7 touchdowns on the year. Those are ridiculous stats in and of itself. But last week against James Madison, he had a 69-yard touchdown reception, and then right after that, had an 80-yard punt return for a touchdown. Just like that, 14 points put Sam Houston State right back in that game. Without Ezzard, the Bearkats don't win. Guarantee it. So on top of that electric passing attack, on top of Ezzard doing just about everything he possibly can to help his team win, Sam Houston State has a very balanced attack as well on the ground. They're averaging a little over 170 rushing yards per game by Ramon Jefferson. And again, he's a guy that didn't have the best game against James Madison. Granted, the Dukes have one of the best defenses in the country. But when he's facing a team that isn't that great up front, he can light it up. He kind of takes a little bit of pressure off of Eric Schmid in that passing game. Although we'll talk about the defense in a little bit, South Dakota State, unfortunately for the Bearkats, are pretty dominant up front. When you look at the Jackrabbits and what they have offensively, we have said it over and over again. You're probably getting tired of us saying it. Back when the season began, we said South Dakota State's a national title contender, and they're a team that's going to want to run first. They are a run-heavy and a run-centric team offensively, and that is what we have seen all year long. The balance is there, though. We mentioned what they did against Delaware, 186 passing yards, 168 rushing yards. They're a very balanced team, but the running game is the strength. It starts in the backfield, where they're averaging over 225 rushing yards per game. You've got Isaiah Davis in there, who has 640 yards, 7 touchdowns, is averaging 7.8 yards per carry, and that's not a fluke. 7.8 yards per carry this year for Isaiah Davis, averaged 7.8 yards per carry last week against Delaware. And then you have Pierre Strong Jr., who hasn't had the year we thought he would have. Many thought he was going to be the best running back in the country. The stats wouldn't say that, but he's a big leader for the Jackrabbits, and he's putting up solid numbers himself, over 600 yards and 3 touchdowns on the year for Pierre Strong Jr. So you've got a dynamic duo in that backfield, which takes a lot of pressure and weight off of South Dakota State's freshman quarterback, Mark Gronowski, who's thrown for over 1,500 yards and 15 touchdowns this year. The one thing that I will say about South Dakota State that continues to impress me, and it's impressed me all year long, but has impressed me especially in the playoffs, is how disciplined this team is. They don't make many mistakes. And that's evident, first off, from Gronowski, only 3 interceptions on the year. I mean, for a freshman quarterback to only throw 3 interceptions all year long, facing elite opponents every single week, that's pretty dang impressive. Not to mention Gronowski also has over 500 rushing yards and 7 rushing touchdowns. But again, you heard us say that South Dakota State didn't commit a single penalty last week against Delaware. Not many teams can do that, guys. I know they're not doing that week in and week out, but right there against the Blue Hens, that shows some legitimate discipline. They don't turn the ball over. They don't force many mistakes on themselves. They don't beat themselves up. That's very evident from this Jackrabbits team. That's going to be so key going into this game against Sam Houston State, because if you remember, last week, James Madison really beat themselves up playing Sam Houston State. Too many mental errors, too many mental mistakes that end up costing them that game. Not to take anything away from the Bearkats, but James Madison made a lot of mistakes. South Dakota State's not a team that will do that. Let's take a look at the defensive side of the ball, going back over to Sam Houston State with the Bearkats here. Everybody focuses so much on that offense, how great their offense is, how elite it is, how fast, electric, up-tempo, everything like that is, and it's true. But sometimes when you focus so much on one side of the ball, you forget the other. The other side doesn't get as much attention. And this Sam Houston State defense deserves that attention. They're very, very underrated. They're allowing just a little over, about 20 points per game. Just 278 passing yards per game. And when you look at that, you're going to say, ooh, it's a lot. 278 passing yards per game, that's a lot of yards. A little bit stingy, a little bit concerning. It's been like that all playoff long for Sam Houston State. And it hasn't failed them yet. Because the rushing defense is one of the best in the country, allowing just 75 rushing yards per game. You take a look at their numbers last week against James Madison. James Madison was a very run-centric team, a very run-heavy team. As a matter of fact, one of the best run teams in the country. They had 271 passing yards and only 159 rushing yards. Again, Sam Houston State found a way to slow down the James Madison rushing attack and forced the Dukes to try to win the game through the air, something we said they could not do. And while Cole Johnson played well for the Dukes, he still didn't do good enough to get them the win. It's going to be another key here for Sam Houston State, is slowing down the South Dakota State rushing attack and forcing a freshman quarterback at a neutral site in the biggest game of his career so far, forcing him to win the game through the air. That's going to be the key for Sam Houston State. If they can hold South Dakota State to 159 rushing yards, dare I say even 170 rushing yards, it's not a bad night for them. And it should be noted that the Bearkats have allowed under 75 rushing yards. They have held their opponents to under 75 rushing yards in 5 of the 9 games that they have played. under 75 rushing yards in the 5 of the 9 games they have played, meaning once again that if this rushing defense shows up like they have all year long, even though people say their strength of schedule hasn't been good enough, even though they say the numbers are skewed, I strongly disagree. If the rushing defense shows up like they have all year long, Mark Gronowski for South Dakota State will have to step up in a big way. And the question is, can he do it? When you look at South Dakota State and their defense, again, it's no surprise that they are one of the best in the entire country as well. Very, very elite, allowing just 15 points per game. They're allowing 170 passing yards per game, 118 rushing yards per game. Again, those numbers are amazing. Those numbers are very, very impressive. And we mentioned again how Sam Houston State would love to run the ball. The Bearkats would love to run the ball and find some sort of balance, take a little pressure off of Eric Schmid. It's probably not going to happen in this game because the Jackrabbits have one of the best front sevens in the entire country. Their pass rush is ferocious. Their rushing defense is ferocious. They held Delaware last week to 68 rushing yards. And so again, this is one of those games where Sam Houston State is going to have to rely on their passing game, rely on Ezra, rely on Schmid, and Schmid's dual threat ability for that matter. That's one rushing aspect that people don't really take into account. They're going to have to rely more heavily on that than Jefferson solely out of the backfield. And that's just going to be very evident throughout the course of this game on Sunday afternoon. For South Dakota State, we've stressed it for the last few weeks. The biggest key for them defensively is their passing defense. That, if you want to point out one weak spot on their defense, it's the secondary, and it's not even that weak to begin with. But when you're facing a team like Sam Houston State, that's what you have to lock in on. That's what you have to be fully prepared for, this almost air raid attack that Schmid and the Bearkats are going to bring and throw at you. And I want to bring out one key number here. South Dakota State has allowed over 200 passing yards in 3 games this year. That's nothing. Over 200 passing yards in 3 games this year. They're 2-1 in those games. They suffered an 11-point loss to North Dakota early in the year. They had a 35-point victory against Western Illinois. Don't put too much stock into that. Western Illinois, not that impressive. And then in the quarterfinals of the FCS playoffs, allowed over 300 passing yards to Southern Illinois, who the Jackrabbits beat 31-26. Close 5-point game there. So you take away the Western Illinois game. Again, they allowed over 200 passing yards in that game, won by 35, but Western Illinois not impressive in the slightest. The 2 games that really mattered, they lost to North Dakota and nearly lost to the Salukis. This is the best passing team, the best passing attack that South Dakota State has faced all year long. Will they be up for the challenge? Will the secondary be up for the challenge? Can they slow down the Bearkats? One final note with the Jackrabbits is while they might struggle a little bit through the air, they do a great job of taking the ball away. 16 turnovers the Jackrabbits have forced in 2021 in this spring season. They have forced 16 turnovers. We saw Schmid last week throw 2 first-half interceptions against James Madison. If the Jackrabbits get 2 interceptions, or dare I say more turnovers, more than 2 turnovers off of the Bearkats in this game, go ahead and mark it up as a win for South Dakota State. So what's going to happen? The FCS National Championship, the final college football game for about 3 months now, guys. Final college football game for about 3 months. Of course, we'll have plenty of content to help you get through this long, grueling summer and off season. But the last college football game we will all get to feast our eyes on for about 3 months. The winner claiming their first ever national title in program history. What's going to happen between the Bearkats and the Jackrabbits? I will say this. First off, 4 of the last 10 FCS National Championships have been decided by 1 possession. It's really not that many. I would beg to say, and I would almost guarantee that this game will make it 5 of the last 11. I believe this will be a 1-possession game. I believe it's going to be very close. It has the makings, guys, really the makings with the offenses and the defenses and just the historic presence of this game, being in the middle of COVID, being in the spring, 2 teams that really haven't been in this spot before. So much history has the makings for an instant classic, and I fully believe that. But here's one thing that I've been really thinking about and that really hammered home my final decision. Last week against James Madison for Sam Houston State, they got back into that game. Remember, they trailed 24-3 at halftime. They got back into that game because of big plays, home run balls, and miscues by the Dukes. Think about this. In about 5 minutes, in about a span of 5 minutes of game time, the Bearkats had the 69-yard touchdown from Schmid to Ezard. They had a stop and the big punt return. After that, they had the kickoff that James Madison completely misplaced. They kind of like a sky kick, but it bounced, and Sam Houston State recovered it. It's like a very deep onside. Had very favorable field position, scored a 20-yard rushing touchdown shortly after that, then got an interception, and then scored a touchdown 5 plays later. A lot of skill, a lot of great effort by the Bearkats, 100%, but a lot of big miscues by James Madison as well. That's not going to happen again. Sam Houston State's not going to benefit from a failed kickoff. They're not going to benefit from many, if any, turnovers from Mark Gronowski. So Sam Houston State has to find a way to win the game without some miscues, without the ball bouncing their way, literally, if they want to win this national championship. And I look at what's going to happen on Sunday, guys. I don't think they're going to see that many miscues. I don't think you're going to see the ball bounce in Sam Houston State's direction as much as it did and much as maybe as it has over the course of this FCS playoffs. South Dakota State simply does not allow that type of stuff. They're a very disciplined team, just like we mentioned earlier in this video. Very, very disciplined team. This game, guys, will be within one possession, one way or another, will be within one possession entering the fourth quarter. Heck, it could even be tied. But at the end of the day, in the fourth quarter, South Dakota State will pull away. They will march the ball right down the field. They will get the ball in the end zone. They will take a slight lead, and their defense will come up clutch in the final minutes to seal the win over Sam Houston State. And I will say once again that if Schmid turns the ball over, if the Bearkats get down like they did last week against James Madison, they will not be able to come back against the Jackrabbits. They will not. But I don't believe you're going to see them suffer a big deficit. It's going to be a back-and-forth game. It's going to be a very close game. But in the end, it's the Jackrabbits that pull away late in the fourth quarter. They get a crucial stop when it matters the most. And the South Dakota State Jackrabbits will claim their first national title in program history. They have been the little brother to North Dakota State for so long. And now they finally will be able to hoist that trophy because, of course, the Bison got put out very early this year. But the Jackrabbits are our pick to win the FCS National Championship. A historic moment for them and a historic moment for college football, period, because not only will they win their first national title ever, they'll be the first champions of the FCS spring season. Maybe the first and only champions of the FCS spring season, because we pray we don't have to deal with this ever again. So guys, thank you so much for watching us here at the Gridiron Expert on YouTube. Make sure to continue to like, comment, subscribe, share our videos. Check out everything down in the description below as well. So much exclusive content and offers for you guys to help you get through this college football offseason. If you love content like this, you're not going to want to miss what we have coming later on this week and, of course, in the summer when prediction season begins. So make sure to keep your eye out for that. And once again, guys, as always, thank you so much for watching FCS National Championship Sunday afternoon. Do not miss it. And we'll see you next time right here on the Gridiron Expert.